Mr. Laehn, you were talking about how neither political party is working for the Republic, right? As you were saying. What are some concrete actions that you would do that would be different, distinct, in terms of constitutional actions as a United States Senator?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the real divide in America is not between Republicans and Democrats. The real divide is between a parasitic elected class and the people. We know that 78% of Iowans are opposed to this pipeline. We also know that 88% of Americans support term limits on members of Congress. We know that 77% of Americans want to reduce or eliminate the role of money in politics. So one just very concrete example where I would be representing the people as opposed to the elected class, campaign finance reform. So Citizens United, Congress could overturn Citizens United like that if they really wanted to. The Constitution says that the Supreme Court's appellate jurisdiction is set by Congress. So that means Congress decides which cases the Supreme Court can hear. Now, Congress has not stripped the Supreme Court. That's the language that's used by lawyers. They have not stripped the Supreme Court of its jurisdiction since the Civil War. But Congress could absolutely enact meaningful campaign finance reform. I would propose a bill, day one in the Senate, prohibiting corporate spending in elections. Full stop. That would eliminate the role of PACs, super PACs in our elections. And then include a provision in the bill that says the Supreme Court cannot hear challenges to this bill, to this law. And that would end the debate, because the Supreme Court could not overturn the law because it would no longer have jurisdiction to hear a challenge to the law. Now, Congress doesn't want the American people to know they have this power. Congress wants the people to think that the Supreme Court gets the last word on the meaning of the Constitution, when that is absolutely inconsistent with what the Constitution actually says. When the Congress disagrees with the Supreme Court in one of its rulings, Congress can pass a law contrary to the Supreme Court's ruling and include a provision that the Supreme Court no longer has authority to hear challenges to the law. Members of Congress today want the best of both worlds. They want to say they support campaign finance reform, but unfortunately the Supreme Court won't let us do it. Right? They're deceiving the American people. They either have never read the Constitution, which is probably true for the majority of our members of Congress, or they have, but they don't want the American people to know the truth.
You mentioned this, the amount of spending in this race. You know, we're already seeing a plethora of ads, you know, for and against Ashley Hinton, for and against Josh Trick. How do you get your name and your message out there? You know, how are you going to get Iowans to pay attention to you in this race?
Yeah, it's guerrilla warfare, absolutely. We're using social media because that's where we get the most bang for our buck. We have a big presence on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we're reaching a lot of people via social media. I'm traveling the state, talking to Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, various groups and organizations throughout the state. I'm coming to the state fair. But this is what a true grassroots movement looks like. We don't have tens of millions of dollars. And although that seems to be a strength for the Hinson and Turek campaigns, it is actually their greatest weakness. Because the people of Iowa know where that money is coming from, right? And they know that if Ashley or Josh are elected this November, the first thing they will do when they get to Washington, D.C. is start campaigning for re-election. And that means they have to go back to those same donors, right, and get more money in preparation for the next campaign. They will be subservient to, they will be doing the bidding of their donors, right? So all of this money that they're getting from these PACs and super PACs and dark money and corporate interests, that money is in fact their greatest weakness, because it shows the identity of the interest to whom they will owe their allegiance if they're elected. I have not had one PAC spend 1 cent in support of my campaign. Not a penny. When I'm elected, I will owe my office and allegiance to the people of Iowa, and not to any outside interest or corporation.
Are you skeptical of tax incentive programs generally, or were you really speaking specifically to this 45Q frequency?
That's a good word. I am skeptical of tax incentives generally. What's happened is, I mean, I'm opposed to the income tax across the board. If we have an income tax, we have this taxation structure. The purpose is to generate revenue for the federal government. I took federal tax law in law school, and the first day of class, my tax law professor said was, if you're coming into this class believing that the purpose of tax law is to generate revenue for the federal government, then you totally misunderstand the purpose of federal taxation. Federal taxation has become a way to create incentive structures and shape human behavior, to create policy through taxation. Now, we saw this most egregiously in the Affordable Care Act, which was a tax, right? Where you're trying to change behavior, you're trying to enact social programs disguised as a tax. I am skeptical of all tax incentive programs. And normally, behind the scenes, who's really benefiting from those tax incentives? Corporate interests, not everyday Americans.
Just clarifying the stance on the income tax, would you be supporting getting rid of the income tax? Is that what you're saying?
I would, absolutely. It would take a constitutional amendment. And I should say, like, for the record, I'm not a radical. I'm not saying let's go burn down Washington, D.C. I'm actually quite conservative philosophically. Change needs to be gradual and incremental. So I don't support overnight radical change. Long-term goal in this country absolutely should be the elimination of the income tax. Yes, ma'am.
You are one of the few libertarians over the past 3 election cycles that hasn't had their candidacy challenged.
Yeah.
To what do you attribute that, and how are you going to translate that on the campaign?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, you're right. They didn't challenge my candidacy because they couldn't. When I submitted my affidavit of candidacy and my petitions, if there had been any flaw, however minor, however insignificant, however technical in nature, they would have challenged my candidacy, but they couldn't. Now, the first thing my wife said when we found out that all the other candidates had been challenged, right? So I have both a law degree and a PhD in political science, and my wife said it shouldn't take a law degree and a PhD to figure out how to get on the ballot. And what this really shows is how the two parties have entrenched themselves in Des Moines and in Washington, D.C., and have erected all of these barriers and obstacles to third-party and independent candidates. And not only are there all of these hurdles when you get to the Secretary of State's office to submit your nominating petition, our legislature also shortened the window of time for third-party candidates to submit that petition. I lost 10 weeks. If I had run for this office 4 years ago, I would have had 10 more weeks to collect the signatures I needed to get on the ballot. But the legislature eliminated 10 weeks, pushed the deadline back to June 2nd. So I had to collect thousands of signatures in a much shorter period of time, much of it over the cold Iowa winter months. Couldn't go to county fairs or town festivals, right? They are purposefully trying to keep third-party candidates off the ballot. And this, again, to reiterate something I said on stage, the real divide in America is not between the two parties, between Republicans and Democrats. It's between the parties and the people, right? They are colluding. The Republicans and Democrats are colluding to stay in power. They're colluding by shortening the window of time for third-party candidates to get on the ballot. They're colluding by not enacting campaign finance reform. They're colluding by not initiating a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on members of Congress, when 88% of Americans want members of Congress to have term limits. But there's probably no issue that more Americans agree upon than the need for term limits. And yet, is anyone in Congress proposing term limits? No, they're not going to limit their own power. Right? We will never have meaningful change in Washington, D.C. so long as the members of Congress have a vested interest in the preservation of the existing system. Yeah.
Yesterday at the fair, I had a chance to speak with Steve King, former member of Congress. As you know, he's very active in opposing the pipeline through the Free Soil Foundation. He's also supporting Ashley Hinson for Senate. And I asked him, if I'm a conservative, why should I vote for Ashley Hinson, who takes contributions from Bruce Rastetter, instead of voting for Thomas Laehn, who says the pipeline is the biggest boondoggle in state history? And he said, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, that a libertarian candidate can only be a spoiler. There are only two possible outcomes, a Democrat or a Republican winning. And overall, he agrees with Ashley Hinson on more issues. I think she would be a better senator. How would you respond to that when trying to appeal to conservative or Republican voters?
Yeah, there is no conservative party in Washington, D.C. Right? So everyone's voting for the lesser evil, which is exactly what Steve said. Both parties are propagating this false narrative that on election day you have to choose between two evils. And if you want to stop the greater evil, you better vote for the lesser evil. And because of that, voters go into the voting booth every election cycle and pick the lesser evil. But as long as we keep doing that, we are perpetuating an evil system. We know from a Gallup poll that was done that 63% of Americans would prefer to vote for a third party. Right? So we're the majority. Independents and the politically disaffected, people who are registered Republican or Democrat, but they hold their nose when they do it because they're just trying to stop the greater perceived evil. We're the majority. The politically disaffected are the majority. And if we all went into the voting booth on election day and voted our conscience, I would win. Right? A majority of Iowans actually support me. But if they're told, well, you really have to choose between Ashley Hinson and Josh Turek, those are the only two credible alternatives, then they pick the lesser evil. That would be my response. When I ran for county attorney for the first time in 2018, a lot of people I love and admire and respect, including my own father, said, run as a Republican. Right? Greene County is overwhelmingly Republican. All you need is the R next to your name on the ballot, and you'll get elected. And I could not, in good conscience, run as a Republican or a Democrat. I could not be complicit in the destruction of our republic. And I ran as a Libertarian, and I won. But I would rather lose office and keep my soul than win office and lose my soul. I'll go down with the ship.
This morning we heard a version of some of these ideas about the tri system from Rob Sands, but obviously he's chosen to play that game.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's a missed opportunity for someone who purports to share some of your views?
Running for a state level office rather than federal, or that he's missing an opportunity?
That he registered as a Democrat years ago and is now run as a Democrat for
Yeah, I'm not going to question his sincerity or integrity. I believe, when he registered as a Democrat, he probably thought that was the party that best aligned with his views and beliefs, and that's fine. For those out there in Iowa who really are, Republicans, and their heart of hearts, they're mega Republicans. They've drunk the Kool-Aid. Good for them. If you're on the left and you really, like Josh Turek or whoever it is on the left, Kamala Harris, whatever it is, and that's where your values and beliefs are, good for you. Vote your conscience. Absolutely. And I think Rob Sands' message is a reflection of the reality that there are more independents in Iowa than there are Democrats. Right? So it may be a reflection of his views and beliefs. I'm not going to call those into questions. It's also good politics, right? Because in order for him to win, he's got to appeal to that 30% of the electorate that are independent. But this also is indicative of kind of the unfairness of our system. There are more independents in Iowa than there are Democrats. Right? I represent a third of the electorate, not counting the Republicans and Democrats who are only voting for the lesser evil and don't actually in their heart of hearts believe in the Republican or Democratic parties.
How do you respond? You've talked about the signatures you collected, but signing someone's petition is different from giving them their vote. Ashley Hinson and Josh Turek each have had more than 100,000 people vote for them already.
Yeah.
So why do you consider yourself more representative than they are?
I absolutely, without a doubt, believe I am more legitimate of a candidate than they are. For this reason, the first principle that a party only represents a faction of a fraction and a faction within society, right? So Ashley Hinson was nominated by a political party, not by the people, right? Josh Turek was nominated by the Democratic Party, not by the people. They don't represent the people. At this point in the contest, they represent their respective parties and the donors to those parties. I am the only candidate on the ballot for the United States Senate, right, who was nominated directly by the people. And I agree, that doesn't mean they're going to vote for me, but they wanted a choice on election day other than a broken and corrupt two-party system. I'm not running against Ashley Hinson. I'm not running against Josh Turek. I'm running against the two-party system itself.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. No.